We need to get real about something. Shopping is not fun, especially clothes shopping. I hate going into a dressing room with 1,000,001 things hanging over my arm to try on. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's so annoying having to get in and out of all of these different items just to try them on. The mirror, that's a whole nother story. They're awful. And I end up, and I know you do too, liking nothing. Something's gotta give, and this is where Stitch Fix comes in. Stitch Fix makes clothes shopping so much easier. You get a personal stylist that sends you pieces that match your size, style, and everything's in your budget. No guesswork, no stress. Here's how it works. You take a quick style quiz, you share your size, your style and budget, and you get matched with a real human stylist who catches your vibe. It's no risk, all style. Get a personalized fix box straight to your door and try it all on in the comfort of your home. Shipping and returns are always free, and there's no subscription required. Plus, get a free try-on for your first fix. Get started today at stitchfix.com/podcast to get $20 off your first order, and they'll waive your styling fee. That's stitchfix.com/podcast.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
It's Wednesday, Addams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday Season 2 is now playing only on Netflix.
Welcome back to the Murder Diaries. I'm Paige.
And I'm Natalie.
Make sure if you want to listen ad-free, you head over to patreon.com/murderdiariespod. And you can also catch us on YouTube now.
Today on the Murder Diaries, we're speaking with Heather Bish, whose little sister Molly was murdered 23 years ago, and whose case remains unsolved to this day. In our conversation, Heather tells us all about who Molly was, what it was like when her sister went missing, and the subsequent search that happened. And finally, she touches on her family's years-long journey to justice for her sister, proving she's a force to be reckoned with in the true crime community.
We are here with Heather Bish. Thank you so much for being here today, Heather, to speak to us about and to honor your sister, Molly. Her 40th birthday is coming up on August 2nd, and June 27th of this year marked 23 years since Heather's sister, Molly Bish, was abducted when she was 16 while she was working as a lifeguard at the Commons Pond in Massachusetts. Her life was taken from her, and she was found about 3 years later in June of 2003, just 5 miles from her family home. Now, Heather, I don't want to speak for you or your family when it comes to describing Molly's case. Is there anything you'd like to add or correct about that intro?
Oh, no, that was perfect. I would just say it remains an unresolved and unsolved case to this day.
Let's start by talking about who Molly was as a person and as a sister growing up and as the 16-year-old that she was when her life was taken from her. We know that she was previously described as athletic and smart, and she played soccer, was college bound.
Yes, so my family moved from Detroit, Michigan to a small town in Massachusetts when I was 3 years old. My parents had gotten nervous. There was a woman who was murdered down the street from where we were living in Detroit. And they thought, well, we'll be much safer in this small town in Massachusetts. So our family, grew and developed in this small town. We bought a house a mile from my dad's mother, my grandmother. So we could walk and ride bikes to her house. And my brother came very shortly after we moved to Massachusetts. And then my sister arrived 3 years after that. So, we were a lively family. Molly was born at home. Actually, my mom was very much into the Leche League and natural things and herb gardens. And so I was able to watch Molly come into the world at 6 years old. I hadn't really known the importance of it then, but I certainly look back and see that now. But I remember it being a magical day and, just touching her tiny little fingers and toes and thinking this is like my baby. Because at that point I was sick of playing trucks and cars with my brother. So I was really looking forward to having a sister to, sort of have the same interests and grow up together and have sort of this like built-in best friend. And Molly really was that. She actually emulated both my brother and myself. She was an athlete like John. She played 3 sports, even starting the first soccer team at our high school for girls. So, she was very much like becoming a lifeguard because my brother was a lifeguard. Yet she loved like the same music that I liked, making hemp bracelets and necklaces and listening to classic rock and roll music and, shopping and we shared some of those interests together. So she was really just beginning to have an adult relationship with us. But Molly was very, very empathetic person. She loved her friends. She loved her friends' families, often calling some of her friends' mothers mom too. Or I often tell the story of how in art class, she would have these really more severe special ed students that would come in and the students didn't often see. That when they came in, she would welcome them in, sending them notes or giving them high fives and just really enveloping them and including them in their little class community. And that really, I think, shows how Molly felt about people. She just, she saw people or she saw an underdog and she tried to lift you up, or she saw maybe a moment to be silly and she would take that moment and run with it. She loved Adam Sandler movies and she just loved to laugh and, she was just very loved.
I love that. What is your favorite memory of or with Molly?
There are so many I have that I value for different reasons. Recently, I had the wonderful opportunity to see that 90s singer Tiffany in my small town out here in Cape Cod. And I was like probably the biggest, dorkiest fan there in the front row because my sister and I used to sing Tiffany songs with hairbrushes on our bed or like on the picnic table outside. And I just remember those moments just being free and really just happy and having fun. And that's one of my favorite memories because it was just so purely childlike and innocent and before all the bad things happened and, changed everything. But
I love that memory can be cherished within Tiffany's music, and it can hit that sweet spot for you. And we're talking about Tiffany as in, I think we're alone now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's adorable. And what
you don't even know. And when I went there, I of course embarrassed myself and told her this whole story. She probably thought I was a crazy person, but she gave me a T-shirt and one of her pics. And gosh. Like my sister would have loved that. That would have been, she would have been like, that would have been a great story that she would have really appreciated.
That is so sweet.
I know. Thank you.
Now, at your comfort level and discretion, can you talk a little bit about what happened, at least in your perspective and experience, the day that Molly went missing? It's, of course, not our intention to make you relive that horrible day, but more to catch up any listeners who may not be familiar with Molly's story and, of course, to get your perspective and point of view on that day.
Sure. So as I mentioned, Molly took over becoming the lifeguard for our town, like my brother. He had previously been the lifeguard for 3 years. He was in college and just wanted to do some construction work and make more money and learn some new trade. So he was off doing that. But he had trained Molly for 8 days previously to June 27th. And honestly, Molly was the strongest swimmer in her class. She took the class a couple towns away through the Red Cross to become a lifeguard. But the thing is, Molly didn't really like swimming in ponds. She was not one of those people that liked to get her feet icky. She didn't like anything icky, really. So she wasn't like one of those people that would walk around barefoot grounding or anything like that. Like she didn't go for like a morning swim out there because she only wanted to go in the water if she had to, you know what I mean?
I can relate.
Right. Yeah.
Same.
So she's more like a pool person. But she got this job. She was given her best shot. The morning of June 27th was the first day of swimming lessons for the children in town. So she was kind of nervous about that. You know, she knew it was going to be more of a responsibility. And unfortunately, that morning, a young woman who was on her softball team and a good friend of hers was hit by a drunk driver, and was in critical condition. So my mom had to tell her this before she went to work. And so she, you know, like crawled into bed and just they spent some extra time together that morning. And, you know, my mom making sure that Molly was, you know, felt okay to go to work. And, you know, she would check on her. And we're from a small town, like a really small town. There's probably 55 people in my graduating class. It's probably maybe double or triple that now, but it's still pretty small, you know? So you ultimately, everybody in different ways. So news of this young woman getting hit by a car spread quickly. And so Molly was getting phone calls from everybody. And she did talk to her boyfriend before she went to the pond. And then she stopped at my house. Like I said, I ended up inheriting my grandmother's house when she passed away, which was only a mile down the street from my parents. I had gotten pregnant, surprisingly, my senior year of college. So after I graduated, I had a baby. And so I was 11 months, this is about 11 months later. So I was living in that house. We were, my fiance at the time and I were redoing the house, and we had this baby, and we were just like, 22, just trying to figure out what the heck is going on in life. But we were lucky because we were close to our family. So we had a stomach bug that weekend prior to that Tuesday. And so I hadn't seen, Molly, and my parents hadn't seen for a few days. So they wanted to stop in before she went to work. And I was feeling better. And they had this like really good coffee at this special coffee shop downtown that I really loved at the time. So I asked them to just pick me up a coffee, my mom to pick me up a coffee on the way back. Meanwhile, I was packing up because I was planning to spend the day at a pool at my friend's house, who was coming back into town, or her mother's house. So, my mom had come back and dropped the stuff off. And Molly had spent some time, playing with that morning. She got to change her and see her. And, my biggest regret that day is I didn't kiss her goodbye because I didn't want to give her my stomach bug. I was, still worried. So usually, we kissed each other goodbye all the time. So that was hard. So I'm just trying to get this baby ready to go. And I get a call from my mom about 1:00. Now, all this is happening 9:30-ish in the morning. Molly gets dropped off about 10:00 in the morning. And around 1:00, my mom calls me in panicking, saying, Molly's not at the pond. Something's wrong. We got to go there. Something's wrong. So I say, okay, I'm on my way out the door anyway. I'll meet you at the pond. So, I'm throwing the baby in the car, and where the pond is, you have to go through downtown where the police station is first. So before I can even get to the road to where the pond is, I can see my mom driving crazily, and she's yelling out the window, police station, police station. So I just pull over, and she pulls over, and she's like, Molly's not there. Molly's not there. Her shoes are there, but she's not there. Something's wrong. And right away when they said Molly's shoes are not there, I knew something was wrong. But here I am with this 11-month-old baby, and I'm in this police station with, again, who they just had a trauma that morning with this young girl getting hit. So they're like, what? I think they just didn't take it seriously. I don't know. I would love to, have a conversation with the police officers in charge again someday. But they, they just didn't do anything. She was reported missing around 11 by one of the moms that arrived for swimming lessons. And then they used the police radio because this is 2000. And there wasn't cell phone service either at the time. So they used the police radio to call the parks commissioner, who eventually came to the pond, but then I don't know, nobody did anything. But so meanwhile, all this stuff is going over the radio, and the fire department can hear it. A lot of the people in the fire department knew my family. Again, we're a small town. one person in particularly was the father of a good friend of mine, and he owned a gas station downtown. And he said, something's really wrong here. Something's really wrong. So the fire department decided to go dive and see if she drowned. So that was really the first reaction that anything happened. We got to the pond, like I said, around 1. They were like, people were doing organized, like unorganized searches. By this time, the crime scene's obliterated. And I kept saying to the police officer on duty that, she wouldn't go anywhere without her shoes on. And he kept saying, no, she probably just took off with her friends. And I said, well, have you checked her friends' houses? And they hadn't done that. So that's when I went to some of her friends' houses in the area. They started like a phone chain calling people. I went and picked up her boyfriend, and then we went back to the pond. It took like another hour or so before, I think my mom went and got my brother at that point. And then he arrived. When my brother arrived, he just, again, people are thinking she drowned. So because the divers are in there, and the searches are not, state police are not there yet, just the community members. And so, John comes running, and like where the pond is, it's really, it was a water department facility. So there's a parking lot, and then there's like a little garage that was for the water department, where they held their stuff. And then there's like a little path that goes over like a little stream and a little bridge that goes to the pond beach. And there's a beautiful pond there, and it's surrounded by trails, and it's really pretty. But it's, a dead end street, and it's not like you can sit in your car and see Molly from the beach.
Well, I was glad you brought up the parking lot, because if I remember correctly, the day before Molly went missing, your mom and Molly were in that parking lot, your mom dropping Molly off to do her lifeguard duty. And there was a strange man in a vehicle, and your mom had her women's intuition going off and said, I'm going to walk my daughter to where she needs to go. And I'm not leaving until this creepo leaves.
Yep. So Molly didn't have her license yet. She only had her permit. So she would drive, and then my mom would, jump over to the other seat and drive back. The day before Molly, again, that was her second day by herself, she saw this guy, and he was like smoking a cigarette, and it didn't look like he was doing anything. And again, it's like 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. So what are you doing there? Didn't look like you were fishing. So she just kind of sat there, and she had a conversation about being safe with, did you feel safe there? And in fact, later that night, because my mom was upset about it, I had a conversation with Molly about it. And I remember, because there was a young man who had a crush on Molly. He was a couple years younger than her, and he would often come down to the beach and hang out with her to keep her company. He just wanted to be around her, those kinds of early teen crushes. But even though he was younger, I remember saying to Molly, you got to be careful. He could still overpower you. You're all alone up there. Yeah, intuition definitely went off for all of us, I think. We just didn't believe something so horrible could happen in such a small little town. But when my brother arrived, he ran to the beach and just started diving, because he knew the water. Like, he would swim every morning and get a workout, because he didn't mind the icky stuff. So he felt like he knew the water better than anybody. So the Warren police and the fire department had to sort of drag him out of there. But I don't think the state police got called in till about 6 o'clock that night. And then, the sun set at like 8. So, we all had to go home, and there was no Molly anywhere. I remember thinking, well, maybe, as the day was progressing, at first you're in shock. You don't really know what to think. I just knew something bad had happened. I thought, well, maybe someone raped her in the woods somewhere, and she's just hurt, and we'll find her. And then I thought, well, maybe they took her and they'll drop her off because they don't want to deal with all this. And so I remember, you don't really sleep that night. It's just like fits of terror, really. But I remember as soon as the sun broke, I ran up and down the street thinking maybe he dropped her off somewhere, and she wasn't anywhere. And they did organize a search the next day that was much larger, but my brother and I weren't allowed to participate. And then the state police, really, when everything sort of got sorted out in the next few days, they, kind of locked my parents in at their house. And, it's kind of this journey of trying to figure out who could have done this to Molly.
That's something I hadn't heard before, that you and your brother weren't allowed to participate, and that it sounds like your family wasn't allowed to be with the search party.
Yeah, right away they told us, like, you don't know what to do when your child goes missing. And thankfully, by then, there was the National Center and there was some support groups that were parent specific. So right away, Mark Kloss from California reached out to my parents, and the National Center got involved right away and supported my parents. But initially, we were not allowed to talk to the press. It took quite a few days before we got Molly's information and story out there. And my parents really advocated about sharing the story and sharing the picture after that, because they felt like those days, that time was lost, and they were misdirected by the advice of the law enforcement agency at the time.
Summer is here and it's going fast, but while we're hanging on and enjoying those beach days, last minute weekend getaways, and barbecues, our to-do list isn't getting any shorter. Enter TaskRabbit. TaskRabbit connects you with taskers to help moving, mounting, furniture assembly, home repairs, and all of the things you're trying to get done. Many taskers are available to help the same day too. To get started, go to TaskRabbit.com or download the app. You can search the best tasker for your job based on cost, skill set, and availability, and also check out past client reviews. Schedule your tasker, and you can even, like I said, do this as early as the same day. Once the tasker has completed the job, you simply pay, tip, and include your own review on the convenient TaskRabbit app. Plus, with TaskRabbit's Happiness Pledge, if you're not satisfied, they're going to work with you to make it right. I love using TaskRabbit, and I can't wait for you to try it too. The next thing that I'm going to be looking for a tasker to do is some light electrical work that I need around the house. I can't wait for some of these weird electrical things I have going on to get figured out and straightened up. And listen, I know if I can't do it, a tasker sure can. Tackle your to-do list today and get $15 off your first task at TaskRabbit.com or on the TaskRabbit app using promo code DIARIES. That's promo code DIARIES at TaskRabbit.com for 15% off your task. TaskRabbit. Book trusted help for home tasks.
You mentioned that agency was specifically geared towards parents. Were there any sorts of organizations or people there that knew how to help a sibling in this case? Because it is very different.
No, right. And so in the beginning, we didn't even think of that really. And, we had this case with Holly Peranian, who was abducted in Sturbridge in 1993. So 7 years before Molly. She was the same age as Molly, just a younger. And it appeared to be a more opportune, she was riding her bike to see puppies than maybe planned like Molly's, but certainly people look at the similarities in the cases, so we thought about, their family, and we wondered about them. And the only other reference I had was that movie, I Know My First Name is Stephen, from that case out west where Stephen was abducted, and then I think little Timothy was abducted, and I don't know, he got away, but the whole family was a mess. So John and I, obviously our first priority was Molly and recovering Molly and supporting our parents. But as time went on, and we would go, say, school clothes shopping or whatever, and I'd use my debit card, and someone would be like, "Oh, you're Molly Bish's sister," and then they proceed to tell me who they thought killed my sister. And I realized that people felt more comfortable saying more obtuse things to John and I than they would to our parents. And they would often couch it by saying, "Well, we didn't want to hurt your parents, but let us tell you this." And it really messed us up for a while. And so I began asking, after a couple of years of that, what about the kids' mom? Because my mom and dad would go meet with the parents. Eventually they, became part of the National Center and all these coalitions. And so they worked a lot with a lot of different families from across the country. And I'd be like, "Well, what about their kids? What about their kids?" And so my mom kept bringing it back to the group. And eventually in 2006, the National Center and the Department of Justice got together and brought some selected siblings from across the country to meet together. And we developed a guidebook for siblings. And a few of us were teachers, so we sort of built it so it could be read you could just like pick it up. You didn't have to like go through it. We wanted to have color. We wanted activities in the back. We were very oriented to our own experiences. We were all in different ages when we went through this. So honestly, it was probably the most healing experience I've had on this journey, because finally, after meeting them, and you talk about things like, like my mom's still giving me birthday and Christmas presents from Molly 3 years later, and it's awkward and it feels weird, and I don't know how to tell her that. And they could understand that without like, all the other stuff people put in when they don't exactly go through what you go through. So it always felt like, now I can stand anywhere and say like, okay, I'm not the only person in the world experiencing this, or I'm not alone, at least.
Do you mind going into a little bit of the suggestions you made when developing that program with the other siblings?
Sure. We talked more about like the experience. So it's not like we're like, hey, do this and everything's going to be okay. A lot of us were different ages. So my friend Trevor from Minnesota was in 4th grade when his brother was abducted, and he had to go back to 4th grade. And all the kids were like, well, why didn't you just punch that guy in the face? I would have just kicked him in the, in the groin or whatever, like 9-10-year-olds think. And I was 22. So my experience was different. I went back to teaching and all the kids wanted my autograph. And like, how do you tell a kid, honey, no, this just because I'm on TV or we're in this magazine right now, this is not, so I would make them write like one rule for safety and I would sign it. So there isn't like one answer, but what we wanted to say was like going back to work or school is going to be really hard. And people are going to say things to you that are inappropriate and they're going to not understand your experience. And that's okay. And how you process that is okay too. Like some of us were athletes and like to go running. Some of us were like to sing. Some of us processed in writing or speaking. I've always been fortunate, I feel like, to be able like to have these opportunities speaking on this podcast today, because I get to talk about my sister. I get to tell you about Molly and tell you about my experience with Molly, and people who lose people in their lives don't often get that experience. If my sister had died from cancer or from a car accident, people don't want to talk about that. That's like, ew, that's bad vibes. That's sad. That's bringing the room down, And I have the privilege to be able to talk about my sister. So that allows me to process our story and our experience. And so I'm lucky that way. So I think it's important for people to know when they've lost someone that it's also okay to be like, listen, I want to talk about my brother who died from cancer or my friend who died in this motorcycle accident, because I'm still not over it. I'm still processing this. I want to talk about, how Uncle John liked this particular cake at Christmas time. It's okay to talk about those things. And I think in the past and other generations, it hasn't, been. And so we did a lot of work on like just expression and communication and like a quote unquote, what a new normal would be like.
That reminds me of the saying, people experience 2 deaths. You die the first time when your physical body goes, and the second time when people stop talking about you. Mm-hmm. And I think sounds to me what you're trying to say is like, as long as I'm able to keep talking about my sister, her memory lives on.
Yeah. And I think, I've been writing my own book, and in reading books of other siblings who've written about their own losses, they're often in a generation older than me, or maybe a couple. And in those generations, I think if somebody died from a sickness, or, they would pack up that child's room and they would put it away. They wouldn't talk about it. We can't talk about Sarah dying because it's too sad for your mother, and we don't want to make your mother sad. And so a kid might not ever process the loss of their sibling because their parents were so afraid to open that wound up and to be raw. And, I guess I was lucky with my family. When we were going through this, we had these, what we called Fragile Fridays, and we would all meet, again, I'm 20, 3 at the time. My brother's 20. And my parents are now starting this foundation and working on the investigation. So they're really busy besides their day jobs. But we would, commit to this. And we'd go to this little diner in the next town and we'd get like fish and chips or whatever. And we would just be together. And sometimes, like most of the time, we were not in the same place in our grieving journey, and sometimes we would talk about things and oftentimes we would not, but we were together and we just held on. And I think that was another sort of message in that book that we wrote was like, you just got to hold on. Like there is a life after this. And, it will always be a part of your life. But, you do have to just kind of hold on to each other and keep going.
The search for Molly is reported to be the largest and most expensive in Massachusetts history. What factors do you and or your family or law enforcement believe play a role in that, despite it being the largest and most expensive, it taking 3 years to find her?
Well, the recovery was the most expensive. So the search for Molly wasn't the most expensive. When she went missing, there were searches. There were dogs that were brought up. We didn't have bloodhounds in Massachusetts then, so they had to be brought up from Connecticut. So they did search, but it wasn't until the recovery. So, they worked most of their efforts after the initial searches, and supposedly there was a 5-mile radius. Now, again, interpretation of what a 5-mile radius is, I would think it's this way and that way. Had they done a 5-mile radius, they would have found her. Had they even paid attention, I have phone logs from the weeks after Molly disappeared, the weeks before and the weeks after, so I can get some context of why the law enforcement agency in Warren, Massachusetts reacted the way that they did. And there were calls into the police department for birds over Whiskey Hill, which is where Molly was found. People were calling in, there's a large amount of birds. They went there and they found a big pile of fish. And instead of investigating further, they just dismissed it as, oh, that was just if somebody dumped some fish there. Well, why would somebody dump a big pile of fish there? Maybe they're trying to cover up the smell of a body rotting. Like, I don't know why decisions were made the way they were, and that hindered us. Again, the crime scene was not protected. So that made a huge difference in any DNA. And right away, the Warren Police Department also was like indicating, they just kept saying Molly took off with friends. They kept acting like she was like it wasn't serious, like she was in Florida or something. And so they were kind of steering the state police in the wrong direction. The state police spent a lot of time on the boyfriend, which absolutely understandable, necessary piece of an investigation. But once you saw the radius of sex offenders, which we, again, didn't know at the time. I mean, we didn't even lock our doors. If we'd known, maybe we'd have done things differently. But there was such a large amount of sex offenders in that area. That took so much time to go through. So they were really just following leads after the initial search. But the recovery, because a man, the hunter found the bathing suit and he mentioned it to an ex-cop who knew circumstances of the case, and they found the bathing suit 3 years later. That's when we were just very fortunate that there was a doctor in Marie Myers, was in the medical examiner's office at the time. She's a forensic anthropologist, so she has a lot of experience. Like she, does digs when the rich people in Cape Cod hit a bone out here. She's the one making sure if it's a Native American or not, and doing the procedures that need to be in place. So she's very, very good. So she's the one who designed this approach, which was an anthropological approach, and it's been adopted since for Molly's recovery. And that's what gave us the best ability to recover Molly's body, because if you know Massachusetts at all, we have bobcats out here, and bobcats traverse certain pathways, and that particular pathway was a bobcat pathway. So Molly's bones were spread out over these 500 acres. We were fortunate that we were able to find the skull, and which was what led us to being able to identify her quicker.
You mentioned some misinformation that went out initially about the case.
they went and looked at the boyfriend. They said that she went out with friends. Is there any other misinformation about the case that you want to clear up for anyone that may hear this?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of talk about a particular party that Molly was at. In 2006, we had a grand jury before John Conte went out as DA and Joe Early took over. And in that grand jury, there was a lot of talk about this particular party. And my ex-husband and I were questioned quite a few times about being at this party. And we're like, we had a baby. Like, we're not partying with 16-year-olds. Like, I don't understand what this was all about. And they really focused on these kids that were 16. And 16-year-olds are 16 and they're doing 16-year-old things to sort of defy their parents and try out this independence that they're feeling. And, but they were not making crystal meth. They weren't doing anything. There wasn't any major drugs involved, maybe a little marijuana, but the kids took a really bad hit in this case and they were really dragged through the mud. And I can't imagine how hard that must have been at 16 years old. Thank God there wasn't social media then like there is now, because I think that would have been, I don't know, more of a nightmare. But I think about them often and the impact. And, a lot of Molly's friends have since died from accidents and addiction. I think that they were sort of lost and damaged in this. And I always feel bad that more wasn't done to really say that the kids were just kids. They weren't responsible, or there wasn't secret drug deals going on. This isn't like any of the TV shows. It was just kids, being kids.
In 2004, your parents collaborated with Anna Maria College to create the Molly Bish Center for the Protection of Children and the Elderly. Can you talk about this center and how it impacts the children and elderly it helps today?
Oh, absolutely. So my father really wanted to start the center at Anna Maria because Anna Maria College is sort of in the center of Massachusetts, and it's a liberal arts school, and is very focused on human service work, like social workers and EMTs, and it had a large criminal justice program. And in our work in the foundation, we learned that law enforcement sometimes has a hard time interacting with other departments. So we really wanted to encourage some cross-collaboration and cross-education. And so the intent at the start was to promote any kind of trainings and workshops and things like that. And we still are doing that. We just have been a part of doing some of the NamUs events, which is one of the data systems you put missing people into to get some of our people to understand and know what it is and become aware of it, but for law enforcement to become aware of it and also comfortable using it. So that's one of the recent trainings that we've been supporting. But my father had a stroke in 2007. My mom really had to spend a lot more time taking care of his health. And so at that point, I sort of took over more of the foundation responsibility and the investigation responsibility and the role at Anna Maria College. So we've done a lot. We've done some NetSmarts work. We've done a lot of education and training around computer safety. When my mother retired, we took over the child ID kits. So we're up to, I think, 850,000 child identification kits that we've provided free of charge to people across New England, really. So right now, we're actually working on a project where we're emulating in Boston. They have a Garden of Peace for child murdered victims. And it's there's too many people. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could emulate that in Central Mass? And again, having that central location and being this beautiful country environment, we have the ability to sort of make a beautiful area where we could bring people to the school and let them know what the resources are available and the different programs that they offer there. So we're building a Garden of Hope, and it will be for missing and murdered victims in the Central Mass area. So that will be revealed in September. So we kind of work on what inspires. We have a small committee that we look at different projects each year, and we identify our goals and keep plugging away. it's great I love, because I'm in education, utilizing the students and getting them involved. I've been working so much in legislation the last few years. We actually do a legislative breakfast at Anna Maria, and it's really great to incorporate the students in the advocacy and the, sort of hitting up those state reps for what we need.
Speaking of the state of Massachusetts, news was shared on TikTok that Governor Healy is set to establish a missing persons unit in Massachusetts. How would this upcoming missing persons unit have impacted or changed the course of Molly's case, and how will it impact future cases?
So yeah, I was really excited when Governor Healy came into office, because she's been a longtime supporter of Missing Children's Day and missing children's issues. Unfortunately, she proposed this budget and this unit, and it was not supported by the legislation for reasons I don't know. So I don't know that she can sort of create this unit without their approval and budget. So unfortunately, that looks like that might not actually happen. Our hope was that I was part of the Mass Missing Persons Task Force for a few years through COVID. And we put together a report based on doing a lot of research. And we had a lot of different people on this committee, people that were working in law enforcement, people that were advocates like me, people that were in DCF, people that were in law. So there's a lot of players that went into this, and we made some recommendations that we felt like there should be a unit under the Executive Office of Public Safety that would provide the ability not to be attached to the state police, but to be able to work with the state police, be able to provide support for the data systems. We're very concerned about NamUs and NCIC not interacting together, and law enforcement not necessarily knowing, again, about these data systems and how important they are. We felt like that there should be a missing persons coordinator for Massachusetts. We have had so many cases recently where women and even in Boston, young men going missing inexplicably. And again, law enforcement gets like minimal training on missing persons cases. So we really felt strongly that training was something that this unit could provide to law enforcement. And then we recommended some changes with the forensics and adding some more forensic people in our departments. We are in Massachusetts, we have all these amazing colleges and great forensic programs, and then everybody leaves the state because there aren't any jobs here. Like it to me, like in Molly's case, what would have made a difference if the freaking forensic guy was on the scene from the minute they heard Molly wasn't there. Not Joe Schmo cop who took crime scene analysis 10, 15 years ago, one class. You know what I mean? I'm sort of the mindset that law enforcement needs to sort of develop into sort of having these different specialties. Maybe we have a forensic team, we're not just hiring guys that have criminal justice backgrounds. Like, I'd like to see scientists doing the science. I'd like to see social workers doing the counseling. You know what I mean? Not that to say that there's a need for security and those positions. I'm certainly a supporter of law enforcement. I would just like to see it ironed out differently. Because I do think that there is a huge lack of training, and that was detrimental to Molly's case. They didn't know what to do. They blamed what was easy and what they were biased towards. And that bias really cost my sister her life.
Will you talk a little bit about what your life has been like as a sister of a missing person?
Yeah. It's been, my life was totally changed that day. I have a fear in me, and I look at the world in a different way that other people do. And, often people will say that they imagine that I raised my daughter differently than I would have had this not happen to me. And I imagine that I would have, but miraculously, she's survived it. I think something like this changes how you interpret the world. And the world is scarier to me. And I know things that other people don't know. Like, I think people often want to think that there's one bad guy that killed my sister and probably killed Holly Pranian too. And he's probably dead and we don't have to worry about him anymore. But what I know is that people who have abuse happen in their childhood like monsters don't become monsters out of the blue. They don't fall from the sky. They get that way from people doing bad things to them. And so there's this sadness that you feel, this empathy towards the monster, but the monster makes the choice to hurt other people. And there's a lot of monsters out there. And they are your soccer coach. They're your singer in your favorite band. They are favorite actor. They're the guy delivering your newspaper. They're your priest, and we have a hard time seeing some people as being monsters because they're not supposed to be. And they're not looking like monsters. They don't sound like monsters, and they don't always act like a monster. But I know that the monster is inside and hides, and there's a lot more of them than I'd ever possibly imagine. And so it does make the world a little harder to interpret sometimes. And people protect monsters. I mean, I think in psychology, they call them the flying monkeys. It can be more apropos, I think, because I just spent a lot of time thinking about how the Rodney Stangers and the Frank Sumners become those people. And like, how are they still married? How are they still, but people are also caught up in abuse cycles, and they're part of that trauma bonding. And it's just so, I think the more you know, the scarier it is.
Yeah. And I think that that's a lot of times where avoiding victim blaming as much as possible is so important. Like you said, you can't blame somebody, say, married to a serial killer for being married to them if they never knew, because they're probably finding out when you found out, because they never got to see that monster inside until later, or they are in a dangerous abuse cycle. You just don't know. So that's a very good sentiment. It's something that I think would be kind of great to end with as we sort of wind up today is a quote from your dad. Maggie and I can't change what happened to Molly, but we can try to stop it from happening again. This is so resilient. It almost breaks my heart hearing it. And I just want to give him a big hug. Such a beautiful quote.
Certainly taught us, even before Molly disappeared, that, service, they were very service oriented. We grew up Catholic, but it was more in the way of serving the needy, and learning that part of the Bible and Jesus. And when, we didn't have a whole lot of money, my mom didn't work because she had that extra kid, and, things were tight, but they still always bought extra mittens and gloves for the kids who didn't have any. And then when Molly disappeared, they thought, oh my God, other parents don't know this. This is again, all of a sudden, a sudden lesson in child safety and criminology in our own backyards. And they just felt that they had to share that, and that they couldn't imagine another family experiencing what we had to experience, and sort of having to navigate it and figure out what to do on our own.
Thanks for everything you've shared today. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I guess I would just say I think that Molly's legacy has continued to be that, I've carried on from my parents' first steps with the foundation, and the governor is actually going to be appointing me to the Mass Office of Victim Assistance in Massachusetts, which is a board that helps support victims and their families, and helps appropriate funding for different agencies to support victims. And I'm really, really flattered by this, because I've been working so hard to talk about just being a victim of a crime like this. We didn't get a victim advocate when Molly was missing because it wasn't a crime yet. They didn't know what happened to her. They were like, oh, maybe she ran away. She's with her friends. We don't know if she's abducted yet. Until they found her body, did we get a victim advocate. And so it's really important to me to sort of talk about this whole area of missing persons and missing children and their families, and the support that's needed moving forward.
Congratulations on that appointment. That is such a testament to your service to this community, if you will, and to those in power that are seeing it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Before we leave today, do you have any socials that you'd like to plug for our listeners?
Yes. Like I said, I've been working on this book, so I've been writing a blog on our website. It's mollybishfoundation.com. So you can see sort of more intimate stories about our experiences in this journey. I've also got a TikTok account that I utilize for the investigation and any foundation stuff. Again, I'm hoping to be putting my own podcast together, so I hope to utilize my TikTok account to really share some of the people that I'll be going over on Molly's case as I dive in deep.
Again, I thank you for sharing everything that you have today and for all of your time.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you guys are doing. I know it's not easy, but it's so helpful, especially, I'm kind of a talker, so I can kind of navigate that, but there's so many families that struggle with getting their stories out there and sharing their stories. And I just think it's such a powerful impact to have these podcasts that are geared towards really sharing.
Make sure you follow us on all of our socials at the Murder Diaries Pod. And until then, stay safe. Bye.